Hi friends, welcome to Take Part, the podcast where we talk about reaching out and joining in to experience deeper connection, better your life, and achieve your goals. This is episode 1. How exciting. I'm your host, Emily. This is my cat, Fox, who will not leave me alone while filming this episode, so I imagine you're going to be seeing him quite often. And this episode is really just setting the stage for what we're going to be talking about this season and ongoing on this podcast, and giving you a little bit of a sense for why you might want to listen and if this podcast is right for you. This podcast will be some episodes where I'm just talking here in this space, giving you commentary on things that I've been thinking about and researching. We have an amazing set of interviews of people who have explored different ways to connect and reach out in their own lives. And we'll hopefully do lots of Q&A. I would love to hear from you as to what you want to be talking about. And so there will be sort of responsive episodes as well once we get some of those flowing. So why might you listen to this podcast? I'm wondering if you're experiencing this. Your relationship to people has changed. You scroll on your phone a lot, maybe. You might text with your friends and family. Maybe you're going on social media and connecting with friends, but you're lonely as hell and you're home a lot. You're feeling isolated even though you didn't intentionally isolate yourself. Maybe it was COVID related and you never quite recovered on the social side. Maybe you're sort of afraid of the world. That would be understandable. Maybe you're afraid of other people. Maybe you're responding to the fact that everyone seems sort of stressed and afraid and angry, and we don't really like each other right now is kind of the energy that you can get when you go outside. You have dreams and goals, but you have trouble getting started because it feels like everything you do has to be on your own. This is something that I've experienced myself and have observed in a lot of people in my life and a lot of people that I've talked to over the last many years. I think that it's the challenge of our age that needs a lot of special attention because we have a lot of societal systems that are pushing us in the wrong direction and are making it easier and easier for us to isolate ourselves. So there are a lot of factors as to why this is happening. I believe there are really powerful forces that are keeping us stuck this way, and that as a society, we're moving further and further away from understanding community through our education system, through our societal messages, through our media. We'll dig into a lot of this topic, but I want to give some hope as to why we are starting to talk about this a little bit more and some of the reasons that we should be paying attention to this. You may or may not have heard of a Harvard study that was done starting in 1938. It was a really, really interesting study. Scientists decided that they wanted to follow the lives of people for as long as they could. So they started with 268 sophomores, all male, caveat, and they continued it for almost 80 years, and it's actually still going. It's essentially the longest study of adult health. Of course, these 268 people ended up in vastly different places. Some of them were highly successful, some of them not so much. More participants were added to the study over time, including women, making it a total of 724 participants. The nutshell of the findings is that of all the factors that influence health, the strength of relationships is the most important. So your ties to other people, spouses, friends, community, family, these are what keep you from physical and mental decline. That was essentially the punchline of the study. And it's not about massive communities or how many friends you have or making sure you get married. It's actually about quality. The quality of those close relationships was a better predictor of long-term well-being than basically anything else, including traditional health metrics like cholesterol level, blood pressure, all these kinds of things. This also extends to brain health. So I'll link the study in the show notes below. It's fascinating and worth a read. There's also a TED Talk from the director of the study that summarizes it a little bit. Obviously, one major limitation to the study is that they did it mostly on men, but they have added women to it. I think it's commonly understood that men benefit more from things like marriage and from some of these structures, but I still think the findings are really fascinating and ring true in general. We'll discuss more examples of this kind of thing on the podcast. So where do you stand on this spectrum? Are you lonelier than you'd like to be? Are you feeling like you're isolating yourself, but you're not really sure why? I suspect that a lot of us are feeling something to the extent of that. And that's why I think it's really important for us to be talking about ways that other people are finding to join in, to participate in the world in ways that are accessible to all of us. And as it shows in the study, these relationships being strong is really important. And so we'll also talk about some of the skills needed to make those kinds of connections, to participate in things that are group related, because that's where some of my background is. And if it isn't enough to talk about the benefits to your health, I also want to, in this podcast, talk about the benefits to your dreams and goals. Doing things on your own is a lot harder than reaching out, asking for help, and getting people involved in your dreams. I think that's something that we overlook quite a lot. We feel like in our society, it's important that we have individual goals and that we achieve as much as we can as an individual. And I think some of that narrative needs to be broken a little bit, and we need to find ways to integrate community into our goal setting and into our achieving of our goals, because that's really a much more realistic way to be achieving those goals and to contributing to society at the same time. So in that vein, we're going to talk about volunteering, we'll talk about writing clubs, music groups, service groups, language clubs, organizing groups, sports teams, all of these different kinds of things, and we'll give you examples along the way. We'll also talk a little bit about one-on-one interaction, more about participating in groups, but one-on-one interaction obviously is essential to that. A lot of the resources that we have about groups are related to the workplace, and that's where my background is. But I find that if we sort of uncorporatize some of those things, they're actually really, really valuable for us as we think about going out into the world, because we're going to be hit with a lot of the same challenges, even some more challenges, because we don't have the structure of a business workplace or the kind of norms of a workplace to help us keep ourselves in line and keep other people in line. So essentially what we'll talk about a lot is this stuff is hard. We'll talk about the complexity that's present when you get 2 or 3 or more people in the room when it comes to backgrounds and communication styles and how we relate to each other. And we'll talk about how we're not very well equipped to deal with these kinds of interactions from our education system or our upbringings. So that's where those tools come in. In workplaces and in school, we're often sort of forced, essentially, to work in groups. There's often a lot of structure to that interaction, and there can be a lot of feelings about how that might go. I know a lot of people dreaded group projects in school. They might dread working in groups in their workplaces and just prefer to work on their own. But I think a lot of that is because we don't take the time to put the structures together that we need. We don't take the time to understand what those interactions really mean. And in some cases, we don't take the time to look in the mirror and kind of learn a little bit more about ourselves and how we would ideally participate in that situation. I know from experience that some of the structure that we put into workplaces is actually really valuable, so long as we kind of take out some of the corporate nonsense that goes along with that. So this is where I personally come in. Since this is the first episode, I want to give you a little bit of background on my journey, why I'm so passionate about this topic, and why I feel somewhat qualified to be talking about this. It's been a big part of my career and my personal life for a long time, and it's been a struggle for me through this whole time. So I think that'll be interesting to kind of follow along on. As a first milestone, I became a manager really early in my career. It was kind of a matter of timing. I was at a small, medium company, and we were growing really fast. And I think I was, 23 maybe, something like that, a couple years out of school. And we were growing really fast, and they essentially tasked me with building a team that ended up being about 12 people. What I found from building a team at such a young age was that, one, I was hiring people who were way more qualified than I was, had way more work experience than I did, and I was sort of coordinating these different processes and things and trying to find a purpose for this team. One, I found that I had to lean on all of those people very heavily to help to actually do that well, right? I couldn't just step into this thing of like, well, I'm the team leader and I may as well take all these decisions on my own, right? So I learned the value of listening to other people's input. Then very quickly, I realized that what I was actually passionate about was making that team really effective and making those people in that team feel like they had an interesting job to come to every day. It was much less about the actual work that we were doing, and for me, much more about those people. And so through that process, I realized that I had a passion for that and decided to go back and get my master's in organization development. At some point in that process, I also decided to do a term of AmeriCorps. And with that, I was a team leader with an environmental education team. I led about 12 people there, and they were all stationed at different places and had their expertise where they were lending that expertise. And we would come together as a team periodically to sort of figure out how to be a team amidst this, big dispersed kind of system that AmeriCorps had built. And that as well, I just really loved that process and loved the idea of bringing that team together. These days, so many years later, I work as a consultant. I've worked in consulting for quite a while in organization development and in change management. I do a lot of group dynamics and facilitation work, and I work with a lot of people who struggle to work with other people or who really want to just charge with their own idea and don't really want to consider what everyone else is thinking or feeling. And it's a really satisfying and interesting place to be. But all of these experiences has been a really key component to helping me understand that working with other people and participating in things is really, really important, even if you don't necessarily feel like you want to. In my personal life, there was another side to this, which is that I play music. And I played in symphonies and chamber ensembles and bands. And while it isn't often talked about in these terms, there's really interesting group dynamics at play when it comes to playing music with other people. There can often be odd and unspoken dynamics or norms that come to play where it's just sort of expected that you participate in this way, or if you're a band leader versus a drummer versus a first violinist in a string quartet, there are these unspoken dynamics and ways of being that I think are really interesting and actually teach you a lot about how to communicate and participate in something both verbally and non-verbally. I've also served on boards of directors, I've volunteered with a number of different organizations, and I've hosted gatherings and social events. And over the years, I've just gotten really fascinated by how these group dynamics and tools and things that I've learned in my career apply to other situations as well. All of this said, there's one detail that's really important in all of this. It makes me sound like I'm sort of this very outgoing, extroverted person who has done all these things. But in reality, I was a very, very shy kid, and it took me a really long time to understand how to work with other people. And I think because of this challenge and this struggle, that's where my fascination partly came in. I also have found it way easier to learn communication and to figure out how to be really good at this in a workplace, and have not always done as good of a job in my personal life. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I think that one big one is that personal life relationships lack the structure that we have in corporate environments to kind of tell us where is appropriate to go and where isn't. And if we're working towards something, a particular goal in those situations, we kind of know what sort of communication and what sort of structures we can put in place to get us closer to that goal. In personal life, it's a lot more fluid, right? We're maybe just communicating because we like talking to each other, or we're sharing our ideas and thoughts. And then when conflict comes up, there's sort of no structure around that conflict to help us know how to move through it and what's appropriate. And so it's something that I've struggled with for a long time and I've worked on for basically my whole life. But I'm constantly trying to improve and constantly trying to understand the different tools and things that are available to me. One last similar point is that in corporate collaboration and communication, it's always sort of in service of some abstract goal that serves the company, right? So one of my theories is that if we learn to work in groups and collaborate in places outside of workplaces where it's a little bit more loose, it's a little bit less understood what the goals are, maybe it's just pleasure is the goal, I think that allows us to build those skills more openly and willingly. And then we might even be able to then push back on some of the damaging practices that we see in workplaces, because we understand what it looks like to authentically build those skills of connection and communication without this arbitrary goal of serving the company in some way. So to finish and to foreshadow some of the things that we're going to be talking about in this podcast, I would love to bring up a couple of principles that are really important to me and that you're going to hear a number of times. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if these resonate with you and if you have questions about them or things that you want to dig into. The first one is really simple, but it's not easy necessarily. And that is that I have a very nerdy love of complexity. A lot of folks in my field do. Anyone who studies organizational culture or dynamics has to kind of think about how things play together, how our individual interactions affect the larger system, yada, yada, yada. But in the context of this podcast, I'm going to advocate for something really simple, which is that if we acknowledge the complexity of other people and acknowledge the complexity of the groups that we're stepping into, we can use tools to help us understand that situation, but most of our society wants to simplify those things down into something that is really, really easy to understand, to the point that it reduces it down to something almost meaningless. And so what's most important is that we acknowledge and hold that these things are complex and approach them with curiosity. So approach them with questions, approach them with hypothetical scenarios, with how might, tackle this particular thing. We're going to be tempted in a number of different situations to say, oh, well, I have a model for that, or I have a box I can put this person in, or I have something else to compare this to. But the skill of understanding complexity and of being able to acknowledge that things are complex is the best skill that you can build when you're working in groups or participating in the world. So I'll be curious what you think about that, if you agree or if you think there's something else to it. And that's pretty interrelated with the second principle, which is that we really love to categorize each other, right? Especially if we're putting people into binaries. And that can be terribly misleading and actually really damaging. There are tools that we use in our everyday life that do this. There are ways that we just automatically will put people into binaries if we ask them if they're this or if they're this, or if they believe this or if they believe this. And if you know nothing about someone and then categorize them into a binary, that majorly then biases your opinion of that person. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're having in our society right now, where we're making snap judgments about each other, and then we're just deciding that those people aren't worth our time, which then bifurcates us even further. So I think that it's important for us to be vigilant, not to categorize each other or put each other in binaries, and that we have to acknowledge that there is that complexity. Again, rely on our curiosity to dig deeper into understanding these complex beings and complex situations that we're involved in. I'm super excited to dive into these. Obviously, they're somewhat nerdy, but they're really exciting to me. And alongside stories of everyday people who are doing really interesting things, I hope that you'll find this interesting as well. So in the next few episodes, we'll cover a number of different things. We'll talk about individualism and how that kind of impacts our ability to work in other groups, the origins of it, the good and the bad, how our perspectives about ourselves and the role of individual impact might impact how we show up in the world. We'll talk about structure a little bit and the pros and cons of structure in groups and how some gross corporate things might be valuable to us if we take the gross corporate stuff out. We'll talk a little bit more about complexity and some of the ways to work through and understand complexity in groups. And most importantly, we're going to have some really awesome guests who are going to talk about all kinds of different things, from working with kids to ham radio to third places to all kinds of different things. So please stay tuned for those. I'll be experimenting with different formats and topics, so I'll be relying on your feedback to know what's valuable to you. Please leave a comment in wherever you're watching or listening to this and tell me, what's your biggest barrier to reaching out and participating right now? What are you experiencing when it comes to relationships with others or achieving your goals? That'll really help me know how to go forward with episodes in the future. And one final word, just as I talked about how humans are complex, these topics are really complex, but we love a soundbite, we love a tweet, we love all these different things that really reduce these things down. I try to do my best to put careful consideration into these episodes and integrate nuance and do my best not to oversimplify. If I missed something, or if you want to add your thoughts or tell me where I might have missed a nuance in something, feel free to do so respectfully and constructively in the comments. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.